Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC. We are the crown jewel of AM radio, perhaps the most powerful and influential AM radio station in America. And we're happy to have you tune in this Sunday afternoon. My guest now is Robert Costello. He is a former federal prosecutor, now in private practice. He specializes in criminal and commercial litigation. He is very familiar with federal investigations and administrative law in the city of New York, and he practices with the firm of Davidoff Hutcher Citron. Among my friends who are lawyers, he's extraordinarily highly respected. As many of you may know, he was an important witness in the trial of Donald J. Trump in front of Judge Juan Merchan in the so-called hush money case. And we're very honored to have Bob Costello with us today. Mr. Costello, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you very much.
Give us your reaction to the conviction on all 34 counts after only 11 hours of deliberation. What do you think?
Obviously an unjust result. My first reaction was shock. I fully expected a hung jury only because of the Trump derangement syndrome, which exists in Manhattan. And unfortunately, this jury was persuaded, I think, by the judge's erroneous instructions. Particularly the one that comes to mind right off the bat with me is the one that says, and I'm looking now at the written instructions, although you must conclude unanimously that the defendant conspired to promote or prevent the election of any person to a public office by unlawful means, you need not be unanimous as to what those unlawful means were. This judge has taken years and years and years of precedent and thrown it down the toilet. It is a basic requirement that every element of a crime be proven unanimously to the jury. In this case, the real crux of this was the alleged misdemeanor offense of filing a false business record had to be enhanced into a felony if you can prove that covering up that, making that false statement on a business record was designed to cover up another crime. The only problem was the indictment didn't specify what the other crime was. So how does Donald Trump and his team defend against something that's not specified? I believe that even the prosecution didn't mention any possibilities of what the crime was until after the close of evidence, in which case they then said there are three possibilities. One is a federal election offense, two is a federal tax violation, and three was a New York State election offense. Well, the first two, since they're federal violations, this court had no jurisdiction over. So that couldn't be one of the predicates for turning this misdemeanor into a felony. The jury, as I understand it, when they filled out their jury form, they did not specify any of the three alleged covered-up crimes. So we don't know what it is that they found, if they found it at all. And the other thing is, we don't know whether they were unanimous for one crime or two or three, or not unanimous for any one of them. They might have been split 4, 4, and 4. This is absolutely intolerable. It comes to mind, red light, full stop. This case cannot withstand an appeal. The only problem is, it seems clear to me that the Democrats and the Manhattan DA's office and the judge did not care whether this case, this verdict, would withstand an appeal. All they wanted was the verdict now before the election, and if it gets reversed after the election, they could care less. And that's really a travesty. And by the way, when I say that's one point, there's probably 15 other grounds upon which this verdict will not stand. All of the Stormy Daniels stuff, the Karen McDougal stuff, the AMI statement, grab them by the you-know-what, all of that stuff has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not Donald Trump instructed anybody to make a false entry in a record of the Trump Organization or any other Trump group that he drew the checks on. So there's just so many, maybe 10 different grounds to reverse this on appeal. But it won't happen until after the election. That's the sad.
Is there any mechanism in which an appeal could be made directly to the U.S. Supreme Court on a due process question?
Honestly, I don't think I'm capable of answering that question. You really need a constitutional appellate scholar on this. And that's something that Donald Trump should be investigating right now, because there are issues of enormous importance here. Ultimately, this case is going to get thrown out, but he needs it to be thrown out sooner rather than later. And frankly, off the top of my head, I don't know of a way to do that.
I found it shocking when the prosecutors called Keith Davidson, the attorney who negotiated the nondisclosure for Stormy Daniels. Mr. Davidson was arrested in a sting by the FBI as part of a gang that was seeking to extort Hulk Hogan over a sex tape. When the blackmailers first went to Hogan, he went directly to the FBI and reported what was going on, and they ran an undercover sting operation, and everybody involved, including Davidson, was arrested. Then everybody else in the case got prosecuted, but Mr. Davidson was not prosecuted. Shortly thereafter, his name began to be redacted in the government's filings in that case. We had my good friend from Bubba the Love Sponge, Bubba Clem, popular radio host, who himself got involved in that whole thing, although in an innocent capacity, made this case on the Roger Stone Show several weeks ago. But Trump's attorneys knew that Davidson had essentially given them all of his emails and all of his transactions with Cohen in return for non-prosecution, probably agreed to testify in return for non-prosecution. Seemed to me like a missed opportunity. I'm sure there were other missed opportunities. I was a little surprised that the judge, and this happened in my case, would not let Bradley Smith, the former chairman, vice chairman, and general counsel of the Federal Election Commission, probably the country's leading expert on the federal election law, which is relatively detailed and convoluted, would not allow him to testify. Yet at the same time, they try to imply that there's a violation of federal law. I saw this as one of the major, as a non-lawyer, I saw this as one of the major flaws in the case.
Well, as a lawyer, I can tell you you're right. And I sat there all day on Monday with Bradley Smith because the two of us were being moved from the jury room to the alternate courtroom, from the alternate courtroom back to the jury room. And he was there ready to testify and wasn't allowed to. And yet this jury was instructed that one of the possible violations is a federal election law violation over which New York courts have no jurisdiction. And the witness was there to say that there wasn't any violation, even if they had jurisdiction over it. So you're absolutely right. That's another grounds for appeal, another firm grounds for reversal. There are so many, quite frankly, you need a laundry list to write them all down. The testimony of Karen McDougal about Karen McDougal should not have been allowed. Stormy Daniels should not have been allowed. You know, the AMI stuff shouldn't have been allowed. That has nothing to do with the entry of a false record. But it was put in there to muddy the waters, to inflame an already predisposed jury to be to engage in the Trump derangement syndrome. This guy's guilty no matter what the evidence says or doesn't say. And it's clear that that's exactly what they did. And I'm concerned by the fact that they had two lawyers on this jury, because you have to ask yourself the following question during jury selection. Why would two lawyers not want to try and get out of this trial when they know that this is proposed as a 6 to 8 week trial? So that's 6 to 8 weeks they're going to be going without billing any clients. Now, what lawyer would be willing to do that? You have to ask yourself. Perhaps somebody who says, I think Donald Trump is a terrible guy, and I want to be part of that historic trial to vote for his conviction, no matter what the evidence says. That's what I worry about. Plus, two lawyers like that, they get into the jury room, and you know that they're going to dominate that conversation. The rest of the jurors, the non-lawyers, are going to look to them for advice, even though they shouldn't, even though they're instructed by the judge, that it's the judge who gives them the law, not the lawyers in the jury room. There's all sorts of problems with having lawyers like that on a jury, but that's the jury that we had.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking with Robert Costello, one of the most respected criminal and civil defense attorneys in the country, widely respected certainly in New York, and who, of course, was a witness in the recent Manhattan trial of Donald Trump before Judge Juan Merchan. Bob, the fact that the judge gave a campaign contribution to Joe Biden's presidential campaign, the fact that the judge's adult daughter is a Democrat political fundraising consultant who was using this very trial as the focal point of her fundraising appeals for the Biden-Harris campaign, among others, these seem to be obvious grounds for the judge to recuse himself. Yet he has refused to do so. Is that potentially an issue on appeal?
Well, it's certainly an issue on appeal. But frankly, I can tell you from past experiences, I don't think that the fact that he failed to recuse himself is going to win the day. But there are so many other grounds in this case for reversal that I don't think you really have to worry about that. I think the judge's political contribution to Biden was very small, and I'm sure that his fellow Democrats on the appellate division will just ignore that, say that it was de minimis. You have a much better argument with respect to the daughter and what she's doing and how she raises money on the basis of this trial. But I think that, quite frankly, there are better grounds for appeal than this particular area. Although, by the way, if he was being fair, you're absolutely right. He would have recused himself. But ask yourself the following question. With so many full, when I say full, I'm trying to distinguish between an acting Supreme Court judge, which Merchan is and has been for quite a number of years. There's so many regular Supreme Court justices who hear criminal cases. And these cases, these big trials are supposedly selected out of a wheel on a random basis. What do you think the odds are that Juan Merchan wound up with the Weisselberg case, followed by the Trump case, and guess who his next case is? Steve Bannon. I mean, it is clearly a setup. The DA's office somehow engineered this. I don't know how they did it, but they engineered this because they wanted Juan Merchan, because they knew Juan Merchan would do things like instruct the jury that they didn't have to be unanimous about which predicate felony was being covered up in order to secure a conviction here, because they were looking to secure a conviction by any means necessary, and they don't care if it stands up on appeal. It's not a matter to them, because this is all part of an election ploy. This isn't real justice and a real criminal case in Manhattan County. This is a case designed to get the maximum political impact for their particular party, and that's absolutely wrong. That shouldn't be practiced by the Republicans, the Democrats, conservatives, liberals. It doesn't matter. That kind of stuff shouldn't be tolerated.
I've seen this one before when I was charged with lying under oath to Congress in my voluntary testimony regarding Russian collusion that never actually took place. And by the way, to violate the False Statements Act, your statement has to be willful and has to cover up some underlying crime, of which there was, of course, none. Prosecutors argued that I had to be tried in front of Judge Amy Berman Jackson, who had sat in the Paul Manafort trial and incarcerated Manafort for over a year before he was actually convicted of any crime, because they said my case was a related case to a case they had filed against 17 alleged Russian intelligence assets who they insisted had hacked the Democratic National Committee. But here's the kicker. They promised the judge that in my trial, they would produce evidence gleaned from the search warrants in that trial. But they never did, because it doesn't exist. And in fact, they never even got to discovery in that trial. So it was judge shopping, which of course they completely got away with. It really makes you question the system. D.C. and New York, I'm convinced, certainly when I say New York, I mean New York City, very difficult for anyone who is not a Democrat, anyone who's a free thinker, anyone who has unpopular locally political views to get a fair trial. I think it is almost impossible. Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Robert Costello, a former federal prosecutor, now a criminal and civil defense attorney, very, very highly respected in the New York legal community. We're very lucky to have him and his unique perspective on the trial that has just passed. I tell you again, folks, if you want to hear this and play it for your friends, you're going to want to go and get the 77 WABC radio app. You can get that in the App Store on your cell phone so you don't miss any of the great programming we have here at 77 WABC, including this groundbreaking interview with Robert Costello. We're going to take a quick break for a commercial, but then we'll be back with Mr. Costello to get some more of his observations about this travesty in Manhattan. I'm Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show, and we'll be right back.
Here in America, work is in trouble. We've offshored our manufacturing, sent away good jobs, and lost so much ability to make things. American Giant is a company that's pushing back against this tide. They make high-quality clothing, sweatshirts, jeans, dresses, jackets, and so much more, right here in the USA. Visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code STAPLE20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com, promo code STAPLE20.
It's The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. This is The Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC Radio. We're talking to Robert Costello, who was not only a witness in the just passed trial in Manhattan of President Donald J. Trump on the so-called hush money issues, but is one of the most respected criminal and civil defense attorneys in the country, as well as in New York City. Bob, I had my own extensive dealings with Michael Cohen. I met him in 2012 when I was working for Donald Trump. He had set up a draft Trump for president website, kept assuring Donald Trump and myself that he was collecting literally millions of email addresses on that site. We asked him for those repeatedly. He never gave us any because, well, he never collected any such thing. 2012 was not the year for Donald Trump. 2016, I'm convinced he turned out to be exactly the right man in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. America was tired of political institutions, no longer trusted the media, down on both parties, down on career politicians. The timing was exactly right for the election of the most improbable president of my lifetime. I've known him, hates it when I say this, 45 years. First meeting him when I was working in New York for Governor Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign, when he and his father Fred signed up to become members of our finance committee. Every time I tell folks how long I've known him, the president keeps saying, that makes me sound old. Can't you just say we're old friends? So I try to do that. I realize you may have some restrictions, but your view on Michael Cohen?
Michael Cohen is a person who only tells you the truth when it's in his personal self-interest. Otherwise, he lies with impunity. I know this, and frankly, I believe that on April 17th, 2018, when I first met him in the conference room of the Regency Hotel with Jeff Citron, my partner, who knew him for 10 years, Cohen told us that he was suicidal because of the search warrants that had been executed on his home and his office, and he was desperately seeking a way out of the oncoming legal problems that he saw for himself. And my obligation was to tell him what his options were. That's what he kept on saying. What's my escape route? Now, this is a man who's so desperate that he's willing to kill himself to get out of his legal problems. I think that's the one moment in time that even a person like Michael Cohen is going to actually tell you the truth. And I said to him that it's quite clear that what the U.S. Attorney's Office is doing, and I used to be deputy chief for the criminal division of that office, I said, you are simply a bump in the road. I said, they're going to run over you in order to get to Donald Trump. So the issue, you keep on saying, what's my escape route? How do I get out of this? I said, Michael, there's a way out of this that I could have your legal problems solved by the end of the week. But what you need to do is you need to cooperate with the Southern District of New York by providing truthful evidence against Donald Trump. Now, if you don't have truthful evidence, it's a dead story. It's going nowhere. And if you think that you can go down there and tell these people half the truth or 3/4 of the truth, you're making a big mistake, because these are some of the smartest lawyers you're ever going to run into in your life, and they will quickly figure it out, and you will burn bridges at both ends. So I have to ask you now, having given you those rules of the road, do you have anything truthful, and it's got to be truthful, Michael, on Donald Trump? And remember, I'm sitting there with a guy next to me who knows him for 10 years, and he says, quote, I swear to God, Bob, I don't have anything on Donald Trump. Now, I approached that same subject over the next 2 hours, probably another 10 different times from slightly different angles, to see if I was going to get a consistent statement out of this guy. And I did. Every single time I asked him the question, he said the same thing. I swear to God, Bob, I don't have anything on Donald Trump. Now, at the same time, he would be pacing back and forth on the other side of the conference room table, and he'd stop because he knew Jeff, my partner, next to me very well for 10 years. He'd slam his hand on the conference room table, and he says, guys, I want you to know I will do whatever the F I have to do. I will never spend one day in jail. He must have said that 10 to 20 times. So that gives you an idea of his mindset. This is a guy who's suicidal. This is a guy who says, I'm willing to do anything. I will never spend a day in jail. And I've explained to him that if you had truthful information, that would be the route you could take, and you'd be finished with your legal problems this week. And he said, I swear to God, Bob, I don't have anything on Donald Trump. Don't you think at that moment in time, even an inveterate liar like Michael Cohen turned out to be, is going to tell you the truth because it's in his personal self-interest to do so. It would get him out of his legal problems. But he didn't take that route because, in my opinion, he didn't have any truthful information on Donald Trump. And he went on to explain that the whole theory here of paying Stormy Daniels and all of that was Michael Cohen's idea because he had been contacted by the lawyer for Stormy Daniels. Remember, when Donald Trump got elected, he took all of his inner circle entourage down to Washington, except for one person, Michael Cohen. They had the good judgment to leave him behind. Michael Cohen was very resentful of that and was desperately looking for a way to ingratiate himself with Donald Trump. When he got that call from Stormy Daniels' lawyer, the light bulb lit up in his head, and he said, this is the way I can do it. I will take care of this problem. And then at a later date, I will go up to Donald Trump and say, boss, you would have had a big problem, but I took care of it, me, Michael Cohen, because he wanted to get back into the inner circle. That was his motivation, as I understood it. Through the many phone calls, I think the government or the defense lawyers said there were 70 phone calls between Michael Cohen and myself over this period of time. I think that's what his motivation was. Michael Cohen was looking to ingratiate himself with Donald Trump to get back into the inner circle, and he was very resentful that he had been kept out. So now, remember, I will do whatever the F I have to do. I will never spend one day in jail. He spent more than one day in jail. And who do you think he blames for that? Donald Trump. And why do you think he writes his second book and calls it Revenge? I mean, that's really a game plan. And I explained this to the DA's office before I went to the grand jury more than a year ago. I did it in private because I said, listen, your office has a good reputation. Don't ruin it by trying a case with Michael Cohen as your chief witness. The guy is totally unreliable. I explained to them that I had made the same presentation to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York after Michael Cohen waived the attorney-client privilege because he accused Rudy Giuliani and myself of conspiring to obstruct justice by tampering with a witness, namely Michael Cohen. This was the story they were sneaking out to the newspapers, that we dangled a pardon in front of Michael Cohen to keep his mouth shut. It was exactly the opposite. In fact, the first time I met him, I was suggesting if you have truthful information against Donald Trump, that's your way out of this. It's exactly the opposite to what the DA's office was telling this jury and what they told the grand jury before that. So I am convinced that Michael Cohen engineered all of this for his own benefit because he was trying to get back into the inner circle. When he didn't get back into the inner circle and when he went to jail, he decided Donald Trump was going to pay the price for this. And you saw the result of that yesterday.
All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Let me thank my very special guest, Robert Costello, one of the most respected criminal and civil defense attorneys, a former federal prosecutor, a man of great integrity. I thank you, Bob, very much for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show.
You're quite welcome.